Coming up, we shake, we rattle, we roll, we even dive through all the local news that matters. Who's in? Who's out? What's up? What's down? It's your Kansas City Week Reviewed. Next.
Week in Review is made possible through the generous support of Dave and Jamie Cummings, Bob and Marlise Gorley, Smithfield Foods, Haas and Wilkerson Insurance, the Courtney S. Turner Charitable Trust, John H. Mize and Bank of America N.A. co-trustees, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome everyone, I'm Nick Haynes, your week's most impactful local news stories dissected in 30 minutes or less, pouring through the week's headlines from 41 Action News reporter Kat Reed, nationally syndicated columnist for the Tribune News Service Mary Sanchez, Mr. Up-to-Date on KCUR-FM Steve Kraske, and from the pages of your Kansas City Star, Dave Helling. Where do we begin? How about at one of the loudest crowds of the week? We're heading to Bolivar, Missouri, about a 2-hour drive south and east of us, as Mike Parson is making it official.
With common sense and honor and integrity, and that's why I'm here today in my hometown of Bolivar to announce that I am running to be your governor in the great state of Missouri.
Parson campaigning for his first full term as governor of Missouri. You may remember he got the state's top job only after the resignation of former Governor Eric Greitens, who had been plagued by scandal. President Trump, by the way, immediately endorsing Parson this week. In a tweet, he says he knows what he's doing. He gets it. But it's more than a year before Election Day. Why did the president so immediately jump on board, Steve?
Well, I think the Parson bandwagon is off and running. Not only has the president endorsed Nick, but just a handful of Republican state representatives are already on board with Governor Parson. They are doing everything they can to grease this machine and get it off and running in a very fast way.
The Missouri Democratic Governors Association, or the Democratic Governors Association nationally, writing, Missourians deserve better, Kat Reed, than a governor whose sole accomplishment, quote, is that he isn't Eric Greitens. It's true, he isn't Eric Greitens, but he must have come up with other accomplishments that he has made since he has been in this top slot.
Yes, it's been about a year. His proudest accomplishment that he continually points to is the infrastructure plan that he's worked on, the funding for bridges across the state. And so that kind of is his major thing, but it has only been a year. So as you're listing accomplishments in the press release, another thing that was mentioned was the Border Wars Treaty, which, you know, is largely symbolic and is something that people were excited to see, but not quite as substantial as some of the other things that governors have accomplished.
His likely opponent in the general election next year, Mary Sanchez, is Missouri State Auditor Nicole Galloway, who is the only woman and statewide Democrat in office in the state of Missouri. But what has she got to offer at this point if all of the bandwagon is on for Mike Parson and it's a totally Republican-controlled legislature? What would she be able to achieve that he has not been able to do?
Well, I mean, she's a fresh face, but one that people know. You know, and she was elected statewide. She's already run a statewide campaign. She's done a very good job as auditor. I mean, granted, reporters love auditors because they give us data that we can immediately report on. But she has a wonderful presence. She's good with crowds. She's good with media. She's very reactive. I mean, I think she'll be a challenger to him, you know, definitely, though it's a Republican state. And I will say, too, though, if he continues to stumble on some things, he was in St. Louis this week and is already taking some flack. And rightfully so, because he tried to hold a summit talking about violence, gun violence, and crime. However, they didn't have and the reason hasn't come out yet, but they didn't have the prosecutors there. Neither of the two prosecutors, Kim Gardner or Wesley Bell, were present. And if you really want to talk about crime, violence in a community, you have to involve them.
Well, let's go there for a moment, because we talked about this 2 weeks in a row already, but sometimes there are issues that are so important it's hard not to. I'm talking about the violent crime issue. For all the talk, Kansas City this week records 6 shootings and 4 deaths in less than 24 hours. St. Louis recorded even worse numbers. Did that change Governor Parson's perspective on adding solutions to crime to this week's special session, Dave?
It did not. He continues to promise that there will be some sort of weapons-related, violent crime-related package offered next January, perhaps hoping that the furor surrounding the problems, particularly in Kansas City and St. Louis, goes away. The special session that he did call ends today as we tape this on Friday. And I think that will be a political problem next year for him, because in essence he called a special session for used car sales when this violent crime epidemic was striking the two major cities. I'll also say this very quickly, Nick. The Trump endorsement was clearly aimed at threatening or scaring away any right-wing conservative challenge in the primary. Everybody knows Donald Trump would endorse Mike Parson or the nominee in the fall. The idea is to send a very clear signal that if you want to go against Governor Parson, you're going to face not only conservatives in the state, but Donald Trump.
But he already does have one opponent, though, which is Cameron Republican Jim Neely, right?
Not a serious opponent. No one's going to take that very seriously here, Nick. I just want to underscore a point that Dave just made. You know, Governor Parson made a bad mistake, a tone-deaf mistake here in calling this special session. A special session that deals with used car sales at a time the state's two big cities are on fire with gun violence. And that will not be forgotten next year. It gives Nicole Galloway one more important issue to run on next year. The governor really laid an egg on this one.
Now, it's been a while since we discussed our Metro's other governor, with half of our viewers in Kansas. What has Laura Kelly been doing for you lately? In the same way, Parsons' opponents claim his sole accomplishment is that he's not Eric Greitens, are Laura Kelly's critics arguing her sole accomplishment is that she's not Sam Brownback, Kat Reed?
Although she campaigned against Sam Brownback and talked about the tax cuts, I've not heard that since she's taken office. The latest thing is she's convening a tax reform council that's looking at the food sales tax, but unfortunately any results from that aren't expected to come for another 18 months. So that's a long way in the future.
Dave.
Yeah, I think she can say, hey, we got the school finance thing fixed. That's a good deal. The state appears to be on relatively sound financial footing now, although maybe a year, 2 years down the road it gets a little dicier. But for now, we're not worried about the kind of cuts we were when Sam Brownback was governor. So those are to her advantage. She did appoint a tax council. She is working on Medicaid expansion. We'll see if that works. So I think she gets fairly high marks for her time. But it's still the biggest thing is she's not Sam Brownback, and she can ride that for a long, long time.
Mary.
She can ride that for a long time. However, people still have everyday needs.
Correct.
And if she doesn't come forth, I mean, this is the way politics works now. She needs something that can be her stamp, that can be her moniker, something that she accomplished that she can really lay claim to.
And she doesn't have that moniker currently, Steve?
No, she does not. I think I agree with all that's been said here. She's off to a fairly solid start here. I would just add that she's about to appoint count them, 2 of the 7 state Supreme Court justices in the months to come. That will give her an imprint on that will last for a very long time.
These were the scenes, if you take a look, in 2016 in Kansas. Long lines, big crowds to vote in the Republican caucus for president. You won't see anything like that next year because Republican voters won't have anywhere to go in Kansas. The state party announcing they will not only hold a presidential primary, they're also not going to hold a caucus either. Why, Kat?
Well, this isn't that uncommon to happen, especially in a case where you have a White House party incumbent seeking a second term. So this is not out of the normal for them to do it. Could save money. Also, just rally around the president now and not have to go through that process.
If it's not unusual, why are so many people claiming this is such a slap in the face to democracy then, Dave?
Well, it is a slap in the face to democracy. No, it is done. It is common, but not overly common. In 2012, Democrats held caucuses in Kansas for Barack Obama, even though he was the incumbent, because they can be party-building exercises. They can raise some money. But I do think that there is a sense that the Republican Party particularly is doing whatever it needs to do to protect the president in the primary or caucus situations, not only in Kansas but across the country. Jay Ashcroft in Missouri, Nick, has talked about canceling the Missouri presidential primary. Was actually a thing where you actually go to the polls. And again, that seems somewhat anti-small d Democratic, but also a reflection of the desire to, protect President Trump.
But Missouri voters currently will have an opportunity.
Yeah, they're supposed to have a primary. I believe it's in March for presidential preference primary for both parties. But again, Jay Ashcroft has talked about going to the legislature to see if they'll kill it. He says it will save money. it would not, and of course it's not going to help the Republican Party because they know who the nominee is going to be. It would only help Democrats. That's, I think, what's involved.
Democrats, by the way, are doing hyper-democracy next year because in Kansas they're doing ranked choice voting for the first time.
That's right. This is a new critter that voters are going to have to figure out. It might result in the results not coming out quite as quickly as they have in the past, but it might end up attracting people because it's kind of a novelty, something new, something different for voters to wrap their arms around.
It's also expected to decrease some of the standing around waiting time, and you won't have spaces overwhelmed with people, which has happened in the past.
We may be getting ahead of ourselves, though, talking about the 2020 election when there is an election just a few weeks from now on November 5th, along with voting for a slew of local council and county officials. Voters in Kansas City will be deciding whether to remove Dr. Martin Luther King's name. Yes, less than 5 months after renaming the Paseo for Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Kansas City Council approving an initiative petition allowing voters in November to decide if they want the old name back. How much money has already been spent on changing the street name, and how much will it cost to put the old name back?
So they estimate that about $60,000 has been spent for the new signs, the labor. Changing them back would be $30,000 to $40,000, I'm told, and that's only if the signs are still in good shape. Because let me tell you this, they are not throwing away the Paseo signs. Those are being sent to the Parks Department where they're being stored, and a long-term solution for whether those are auctioned off or destroyed, that is going to be determined after this election.
Won't this if this actually happens, Mary, and voters say, no, we want to change the name back to the Paseo, won't this just begin a new campaign then to find something else to name after Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in Kansas City?
It very likely may, and that's a fine outcome, but this whole thing, I think, is somewhat tragic. I wish that it would have been handled differently from the beginning. You've had these different opposing views of how we want to recognize Dr. Martin Luther King. And I think the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, who originally started it, they're so grounded in, frankly, a much deeper, more relevant understanding of who Dr. King was in all of his encompassing ways, far beyond just as a uniter of little black girls and little black boys. And yet then you have another cadre of people that wanted to have it be the East-West street name, and they were thinking, and largely a white community, was thinking more along those lines. And it's just these conflicting views that didn't really need to happen. I don't think anyone even thought that the historic preferences, that people who really just grind in, not so much on who he is, and no disrespect to him at all, but that really wanted to keep the name because it's a Kansas City name that they recognize, that frankly doesn't really have that much to do with Kansas City because it's named after a major avenida in Mexico City.
Steve, you know, Kansas City has gotten itself in a heck of a pickle here, Nick. Thanks once again to something Dave Helling's written a lot about, which is this: it's way too easy to get initiative ideas before the public. And right now, what kind of signal is our city going to send if, in fact, voters say, we're going to remove the name of Dr. Martin Luther King from one of our major thoroughfares in this city? The embarrassment, the mark that'll put on this town with a move like that, I think, will be profound and not the kind of publicity we want.
Kat.
I think the thing you're going to see moving forward is this continued debate over, is this about race or is this about process? Because the people who are pushing the renaming back to the Paseo, they say that this is because the city council circumvented them. They changed the name. They didn't have any say. And meanwhile, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference says this is about race. This is still a debate about race. You have Alicia Kennedy still in the middle of this debate. She voted against the name change. And she, in talking to me about this and the vote, she said that the SCLC was engaging in race baiting over this issue. So this argument, you're going to see that a lot moving forward.
This week, Kansas City Star columnist Dave Helling adds new intrigue to the push to build a new downtown ballpark now that the Royals ownership is changing hands. The bi-state tax law that allowed for the renovation of Union Station apparently is still on the books, and it allows, get their citizens to put a stadium tax question on the ballot by petition. He says it would take roughly 14,000 valid signatures in Jackson County, more than 13,000 in Johnson County to force a vote. Is there any evidence, though, that anyone, Dave, is actively seeking to do that?
Well, not yet. There is some active discussion of downtown baseball and mechanisms, and Mayor Quinton Lucas is slowly but surely backing away from his so-called no Maserati statement of the primary. to at least give this some consideration. And he's talked about a bi-state mechanism. And so the point of the column was to say, basically, in case you weren't looking, 17 years after they stopped collecting the tax for Union Station, the group that, sort of oversaw that process is still in place. And you could still use the legislation to put it on the ballot by petition. In fact, I called some folks in Kansas to tell them about that, and they said, where did that come from? They're not used to it in Kansas. So it could happen. But I do think we are years away from this option really realistically.
But you also have some fine print in there. You say that it can't be just for a stadium.
Correct.
There has to be something else too. And then the last time around, of course, we had the arts component to that. But what else could be in a bi-state tax if it's not just a downtown ballpark, Steve?
Well, I think people would probably quickly turn to the arts. We've been down that road before. There's a whole host of museums in the bi-state area that desperately need more funding. Nick, this is a conversation that this city and this community needs to have. Dave has done us a service by jump-starting this conversation. Is Kansas going to be willing to play ball and pay for the stadiums? Will it be on the backs of Jackson County voters one more time? I think those days have come and gone. And then if Kansas agrees to come aboard, are they going to say, hey, in order to get our support, we need to have one of those stadiums on the Kansas side of the state line? Big, important questions that we need to work through.
Yeah. Now, Steve says that some say that Dave Howling has provided a service. Others roll their eyes and say, oh, my God, now I can't believe you're even talking about something like this, Mary Sanchez. Is there anything that you could conceivably see being supported on the Kansas side to make that work?
We're a long way off. I actually do commend Dave for it, absolutely, because I didn't know that. I mean, it was a big, oh, wow, wait.
Yeah, what's that?
I don't see it happening, partly because so many different entities have to come together. If you start talking about the arts community, you're talking about big donors. You're talking about the philanthropic community. And that's going to have to meld with government in a way that we don't normally see. It would be a great conversation to have if it can be done in a way that can build more of a broader sense of this region community. That I would welcome. But it's another one, it's a long way off, and I don't know who can lead that conversation.
Yeah, a couple things to add to the conversation. First of all, the law that's in place authorizes up to a 1/4 cent sales tax. Doesn't have to be that much, though. It could be an eighth or some smaller number. It raises a lot of money. A 1/4 cent in Johnson and Jackson counties, which, by the way, would have to approve it before it takes effect, would raise about $100 million a year over 30 years. That gives you enough for not only a Royal Stadium, but a Chief Stadium if they want a new thing as well. And the second thing to keep in mind is it can't be for stadiums. It has to be for some other cultural amenity. You can't use it for transportation or something like that, but museums, arts, but it doesn't have to be 50-50. It was in bi-state too, but it doesn't have to be. You could do 25-75 or something like that. Those things will have to be.
Getting lots of questions, by the way, from viewers about this too. Lee wants to know what happens to Kauffman Stadium if the team moves downtown.
That would be under part of the discussion,
Yes,
whether to
absolutely.
tear it down, if there's any assets, if you could move the seats down, although I doubt that would happen. And whether the Chiefs want to stay at the Truman Sports Complex or move to Kansas potentially, as Steve suggests.
No, that would be then two stadiums with nothing going on. What happens?
And then you would tear them down, theoretically, and that's happened in other communities.
All right.
So
Angela asks, would a new stadium still keep the Kauffman name?
Pretty early on, I could see that continuing to live on, though. And one thing I do want to mention, if it moves downtown, and we're talking about what maybe the differences would be, you might see less parking, I would think. Yes. And that, I wonder how that would play into the debate of moving it downtown because of Johnson County people driving over. You won't have those massive parking lots if you build it downtown.
That's one of the big issues here.
While there's a lot of talk about how to spend your money on a new downtown ballpark, whatever happened to some of the other big projects in our metro that have already been approved? This week, the long-touted downtown convention hotel project being scrutinized. It's supposed to open next year, but the cost to build the new 800-room hotel at 16th and Baltimore is being hammered with cost overruns. It started with a price tag of $310 million. Now it's $57 million more than that. But who is on the hook for that extra price, the developers or taxpayers? And if it's the developers, should we care, Dave?
It is the developers. We should care only to the extent that there was some discussion of going back to the council and trying to redo the deal so that the developers could recoup some of that cost through a TIF program or something else. and there was a pretty loud statement that we don't want to go back to the council in the current environment to change the framework of the deal. So they'll try and make it up. Now, I was told this week by a person very close to that project that they're doing fine in terms of renting the rooms. There is support for this project from conventioneers and others who are coming. They're not worried about putting people in those rooms going forward. So it remains a project that is roughly on schedule and roughly on budget. I don't think we have to be too worried about what's going on.
Okay.
I think some people will keep an eye on, though, there was this study with Visit KC of occupancy rates, and we are at 66% occupancy. A healthy rate is about 72%. So that is a growing pain. Will we be saturated with too many hotel rooms? It might take some time to get that percentage up.
As we're working through this It's Your Money segment, did you see the latest big plans proposed for downtown? How about a 10-mile circular hiking and biking trail that backers are calling the Kansas City Green Line? And they're getting inspiration for their project from Atlanta's 22-mile Beltline, a recreational loop along a former rail corridor that draws 2 million visitors a year. Can you visualize yourself walking, jogging, rollerblading, or cycling on something like that here? I'm sure a lot of people would say yes if it doesn't cost me anything. But who would be paying for this?
It's very, very early on. This is just in the conceptual phases, so I have not yet seen a concrete plan to pay for it because of how early on this is.
What a cool idea this is, though. This is a really cool idea. Other cities have done it, New York City being among them, Nick. If Kansas City can pull something like this off, a lot of people would be excited about
here,
it.
because I think it would be a great thing.
Don't be a sourpuss.
But if there is a significant taxpayer ask for this, when streets on the east side remain unrepaired and potholed and sidewalks are a mess, it's going to be a heavy lift.
Well, Mary, I want to get into you with that, because isn't there already pushback about spending money on these kinds of projects? The push, of course, for spending millions in expanding bike lanes in Kansas City, that's already causing controversy, particularly on Kansas City's east side. What is the concern about spending money on those? Is it, as Dave points out, a question of priorities, that with rising crime, potholes, lack of affordable housing, you have money to spend on these?
It's what seems to be most relevant to certain communities. If you are fearful of even walking down your street or having your child walk to school, if that is a fearful activity that should be a normal activity, and then the idea of we're going to build these bike lanes so a different type of person is going to be using that to bike downtown to their work, is that even going to occur? And it just seems like it's not meeting the needs of a community. I will say, though, I think there's a way to bridge all that, and you can make a community safer by adding those sorts of things. Foot traffic is a huge thing to increase safety. You get more people coming through a community. If you fix the sidewalks as well, you can do both.
I think that there's been this false choice that was established during the mayoral race and has carried on today of, if you're spending money on a bike plan, then you're not spending money on affordable housing. You're taking money from affordable housing. I think that people need to keep in mind that a bike plan does not have, if they pass this, has no funding attached to it. They estimate over, the next 50
I thought I was seeing
years,
figures like $400 million.
$400 million would be if they built out every single bike
over
lane
a lot of years.
over many years. And so I think there's been a lack of understanding on that. And I also would say, they're doing this. The city initiated this bike plan because an audit found that the current bike plan was inadequate. So people worked on this. It's kind of just like, if you're adding bike lanes haphazardly, it's like baking a cake without a recipe. And so they're trying to have an overarching framework.
Perhaps more than any other story this week, it was the nation's latest vaping death, bringing more coverage to our area than any other. The Kansas Department of Health announcing the country's 6th vaping fatality as a Kansas woman over the age of 50 with a history of health problems. But the news pushed the state's top medical officer to announce it's time to stop vaping. If you or a loved one is vaping, please stop. That's on top, of course, of the president's proposed ban on the sale of sweet and fruity flavored cartridges for e-cigarettes. We got several emails about this story, including from Dr. Brad Rodu, who claims scaremongering about vaping does a disservice to public health. Are we scaremongering when it comes to vaping, when it's only people illegally using it or using it in the wrong way, Mary?
We don't even know the full answer to that question yet. So yes, I do think that there is an argument to be made that it is a bit of scaremongering and that it is the topic that media loves. Local, national, it is everywhere. It is even within, like teenage magazine type writing, as well as like the nightly news coverage. We don't know enough information yet. However, some people have died, And some of the more serious illnesses, they're not all linked to the THC in the cartridges being used. So, I mean, there's just a lot that we don't know yet.
When you put a program together like this each week, you can't get to everything. What was the big story we missed? Was it Michael Stern who announces this week he's stepping down after nearly 2 decades at the Symphony? He won't renew his contract, which expires in 2023. It's supposed to be eviction day for the T-Bones, now a last-minute extension. They've been given another month in hopes of a new buyer stepping forward. Is it really a big deal? It's certainly getting plenty of headlines. A woman leading the Kansas City, Missouri Fire Department for the first time in its history. Have they finally turned the corner? MU enrollment up for the first time since protests put the Missouri school in the national spotlight in 2015. There were local tributes to 9/11. And how many lazy rivers do we need? The Star reporting on a new arms race between cities in Johnson County to build the latest and greatest rec centers. Okay, Kat, was it one of those options or something completely different?
I think having the first woman to lead the fire department is a huge story, especially in a department that has this past history of sexual harassment allegations, of lawsuits. I think that it's a huge cultural shift and symbol.
Mary.
I would agree with that. I mean, everything deserves some coverage, and the Kansas City Star has definitely been covering this follow-through with the issues with the sexual abuse on the Priest scandal. And as much as people don't want to hear that, it's reconciliation. It needs to happen. So it's a good story.
Steve.
Nick, I picked something else. 500 people are going to be gathering tomorrow morning, Saturday, to discuss climate change in this community. Lots of mayors leading that effort. An important step. I commend them all. You're going to be involved in that as well.
I certainly am, Dave.
Yeah.
Very briefly, there's a discussion of what to do with the old Bannister complex that has been largely cleaned up. That will be a major discussion at the council level in the months to come.
And that is our Week in Review. Our thanks to our news reviewers. I'm Nick Haynes. From all of us here at KCPT, thanks for spending part of your weekend with us.